Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Javon Harrington, back to hit you another video. And today, we are going to be continuing the series, What If Issei Was the Shield Hero? High School DxD, Curse of the Shield, Season 3, Part 1. We are already at the midpoint of this story, so first and foremost, I want to say thank you to everyone who supports Power Core Productions and Podcastings. As always, I cannot do it without you. You make the channel grow, you make the core grow. For this week, I do want you guys to stay in tune as I have a lot planned. I'm not sure which day this week in particular, but I want to test and do a double upload on that day of 2 stories just to see how you guys are feeling about it in general and get a good idea of if you guys would want more double upload kind of days. I think that now's the time to start pushing out more of this content. I've got a lot of stories, a lot of ideas that I want to get off the ground, and I think it's time to take things to the next level, and I'm sure you would agree. So keep that in mind that within the next week or two, I am going to be pushing to try to get double upload days, and if I can find 2 stories that I think are good enough that I can get done in one day, 2 of them in particular, then that's how we'll do from there. I'll probably start with just doing one day, and if that works, then I'll just keep doing one day. Maybe I'll do 2 days where I do 2 videos and just have another day where I have a day off. I'm not sure yet, but I'll figure that out as time goes on. Also, make sure that you're liking, commenting, subscribing, and make sure you hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to get into today's video. So, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Issei would find himself surrounded by the darkness. He wasn't sure of where he was. As he looked around, there was only one thing that he could feel in that moment. An immense amount of pain. The feeling of loss, betrayal, anger, self-loathing. And he would be serenaded by a familiar voice. A voice soothing, as sweet as honey. It was the voice of his first love, of the girl that betrayed him and led him down the path that he found himself today. He heard the voice of Rainier, her tempting, soothing voice, reminding him of the lie he once lived, and then bringing him to the reality that was his life. Issei would awaken in a cold sweat looking around in his room. It had gotten much bigger since Rias had done the renovations on the house, allowing for it to be much more spacious and accommodating for all of the females of the Occult Research Club, as well as Issei's family. As he looked down at his left shoulder, he could see that the mark had spread. What was originally a tattoo on his left chest, that of the black dragon, it had now grown in size. The length of the dragon, from its waist to its tail and its full body, covered Issei's left side entirely. It extended down past his ribcage to his lower left hip. From there, the dragon's mark had made its way to his chest, extending over to his left shoulder, and just before where the elbow was where the wings would meet its end. Rias and the others were worried. The mark of the dragon was growing, and they weren't sure if this were a sign of things to come, whether it be good or bad. On the other hand, Issei had also tried to communicate with Kuroi more, the black dragon. The two of them spoke calmly to one another, as they were both partners, but the black dragon didn't have much to say to Issei, at least not a lot that Issei cared to know. The black dragon will explain to Issei more about its past and its history, about how he, along with his brothers, Albion and Dreg, were the last three great dragons from the old war, and how they were sealed into sacred gears. His brother, Albion, was sealed into divine dividing, the wings of the white dragon. As for his brother, Dreg, he too were sealed inside of the boosted gear, the gauntlet itself. And as for he, the black dragon, he were sealed away inside of the cardinal shield of the legendary shield hero, and as such had been passed down throughout the history of mankind. However, all the same, there was still the issue of the mark growing on Issei. Kuroi would warn that that mark was the signifying of a new dawn of power. Of course, where Issei would be on that threshold was up to him. But safe to say, he was at a juncture in his life. A crossroads, if you will. Now, before him were two paths. One that could allow him to harness the power, to get a handle of his cursed energy, and to gain control over himself. Or he could walk down the other path and lose himself completely in the darkness, be swallowed up by his rage and hatred, give in to the curse, and the curse would consume him as it had many of the other shield heroes that had come before him. He would also learn more about the hero Naofumi, learning more about him and who he was as a hero. Kuroi would explain that among all who had donned the shield, Naofumi was truly one of the best. His skills were second to none, and he stood out among even the four cardinal heroes themselves, while only being the shield hero. And his strength was a testament to the fact that the shield was the only one to survive the Great War. The spear, the bow, and the sword had all been destroyed in the process. In fact, they were destroyed just merely helping the shield try to seal him away. But the fact that the shield was strong enough to remain showed just how powerful his resolve truly was. And it showed Issei had a lot to live up to. In the meantime though, Issei had to adjust to other matters in his life. He was now surrounded by more women, all of whom had taken interest in him. The girls of the House of Gremory, in some form or fashion, had found themselves rather endeared to Issei, and this caused some jealousy to arise amongst them. But there was one who seemed to be a bit worried than the others, and that was Koneko. Issei wasn't sure why, but she seemed a bit off, like there was something that was truly bothering her, but he couldn't tell what it was. In the meantime, the Occult Research Club were preparing their summer plans, as the summer break was now upon them. Of course, this was Issei's first year with the club, so he got a chance to see what they would be doing. Rias explaining that they were going to be taking a trip to the underworld for a while, and that they would be getting a chance to meet with her family as well as others within their realm. Azazel was also going to be going and overseeing their training, as it was time for them to take the next stage and evolve in their powers and abilities. Not too long after, they would take what would be known as the interdimensional Gremory train, a train built especially to travel across the many different realms and dimensions. This was the proper way to get to the underworld, as opposed to how Issei had done it, using a summoning circle before leaving on the Griffin. This was a lot more smoother and easier for the most part, and everyone enjoyed the ride. although Gasper would notice that Koneko did still seem a bit off compared to everyone else. But when he tried to check on her, she would assure him that everything was fine. Before long, they also had others riding with them, that being Sona, Tsubaki, and Saji, who were being dropped off in the Sea Tree domain, before Rias and the others would be heading to the Gremory domain itself. Although once they had arrived, the train seemingly stalled in mid-air, as there seemed to be some type of delay of some sorts. Azazel and Rias would go to check it out, and everyone would be left in their own cart in the meantime. Issei learning that other deities also existed in this world, not just the standard angels, devils, and fallen angels, but from other mythologies also existed as well, such as the Norse mythology, as well as the Greek and Roman mythology, and even others such as the Egyptian and Persian mythologies all existed as well, with their own pantheons of gods and other beings. For Issei, this was truly an eye-opener, to see that there was another world all into themselves, that there was really more than to just the big three that Issei had become accustomed to. This now had him even more on edge than before, knowing that now the threats were on a much larger scope than he could have possibly imagined. However, they wouldn't have too long to reflect on this, as it seemingly they all disappeared from midair itself, before arriving on the ground, no one knowing just where they were or how they had gotten there, and they could see that Azazel and Rias were missing. And to make matters worse, a large dragonoid-type figure would make its appearance, as it would begin its attack upon the group. With Rias nowhere to be seen, Akeno would have to take charge as the next in line, coordinating everyone and getting them into position to fight. Issei would summon the Black Angel Shield, as he had called it, the shield that was imbued with the power that Akeno possessed. As the metallic black winged shield would form on his hand, he and Akeno would combine together for a double assault, amplifying their powers enough to be able to make a large strike on the beast, while Kiba using the Holy Devil Sword and Zenobia using Durandal would both get in a couple of attacks whenever they could. Issei would use his airstrike shields to allow Zenobia and Kiba to bounce around in the air freely, to move without worry of falling or not landing in a proper area, while Koneko would use her strength to try to guard and protect Asya and Gasper. Even Gasper was able to help as well, using his time stop, seeing as how his hidden Valor view had gotten much stronger thanks to the potions that Issei was making with his blood. It was able to allow Gasper to control his sacred gear a lot better than he could originally, and it was actually able to hold the dragon in place just long enough, where Issei would go in for another strike. Using the quick change, he would summon the Dragon Slayer shield, a shield that was made with the combination of Ascalon, the dragon slaying sword. He would free the sword from the shield, switching to a shield sword mode of sorts, throwing the sword over to Zenobia since she was better at it than he was. He would simply use the shield's gem and shoot a powerful blast at the dragon, dealing enough damage for Zenobia to go in for one more slash before Azazel would arrive and stop the fighting. Everyone would be surprised by this, and the dragon, after recovering a bit, would introduce himself as Tani. He was the Blazing Meteor Dragon, who was once a dragon emperor himself, now turned devil, in service to the House of Gremory, and he was going to be helping them with their training and abilities. Of course, from what Azazel had been able to see, they had all improved a great deal, but there was still so much more that they could do, especially Issei. He was proud to see that the young man had developed the ability to quick change his shield on command, something that he had a hard time doing with originally, although it was definitely a taxing ability to say the least, so that was something they were going to have to work on. But in the meantime, he had definitely shown much growth. Once everyone had settled down, they would eventually arrive to the mansion of the Gremory household. There, not only would Issei meet with Rias' mother, but he would get a chance to meet with her father once again, as well as her brother, the Devil King Sir Zex. They enjoyed a nice meal where the family would try to get to know Issei a little bit more, much to Issei's embarrassment, as his love of women often persisted over anything else, and having the chance to see Rias' mother, well, he got a chance to see where Rias got her good looks from, and there was definitely no doubt about that. Even Rias became a bit embarrassed with all the attention that she was getting, and she tried her best to hide how flustered she was, although everyone would teasingly say that she liked it to an extent. Eventually, after dinner was over, everyone would go to their rooms and try to get some sleep, as training would begin the next day. When the time came to begin, everyone would go off to improve in their own individual skills. For Kiba and Zenobia, it was getting a handle of their special sword's abilities. For Kiba, it was getting a mastery over the Holy Devil Sword, and for Zenobia, mastering and controlling the Holy Sword Durandal. Asya would focus on her Twilight Healing, her sacred gear, not just using it to heal from a close, but to heal from a distance as well. If she could increase the radius of which she could heal others, she could be an even greater asset in battle. For Rias, she studied battle tactic and strategy, learning how to best utilize everyone's abilities and taking them all into account. For Akano, much to her chagrin, she would be training with someone she had known for a very long time. Her father, Barkio. Casper would go for a walk in the town, slowly overcoming his shyness over time, getting over his timid nature and finally getting a hold of his sacred gear, and trying to not rely so much on Issei's potion blood. Sure, while it was a help, it could potentially be a crutch, and the last thing he needed was to become too reliant on it, since he never knew when Issei would or wouldn't be around to have more, and he would take this to heart. For Koneko, she was still staggering. She was doing her strength training, trying her best to improve, but she felt as though she had hit a wall, and she wasn't sure just how much further she could go. And then finally there was Issei, who would be training with Tani in order to activate his sacred gear's balance breaker. Up until this point, having the variant shields were definitely a big help, but it was that black armor of his that he really needed to get a grasp on. He had to find a way to harness and control that cursed power within, to not be swallowed by the curse, but to gain a mastery over it, which was easier said than done. He had to figure out a best way to do it without using blood sacrifice or giving up more of his soul to the dragon. These were quick ways to gain power, but the lasting damage that it did to one's body would be felt long after its use, and in the end, it really just wasn't a safe way to go about doing it. One afternoon, while Issei had wrapped up his training with Tani, he would be approached by a man in a tracksuit. He had been watching Issei train from afar, and he wanted to meet him for the first time. The moment he got close enough, Issei's shield would start to glow, recognizing the presence that was among him. "So, we meet at last, Red One. Ah, Black One. It seems you have done well. I hear you have met with the White One. Indeed, I recently had a meeting with our brother, Albion. I have not had a chance to meet him yet. Is he faring well?" "He is indeed. His user is a devil much like our own." Issei would be a bit confused by this, but it wouldn't take too long as the man in the tracksuit would reveal his red gauntlet. He was in possession of the boosted gear, leaving Issei absolutely awestruck. Not only had he met the White Dragon Emperor, but now he was in the presence of the Red Dragon Emperor, Syra Org Bale himself. Syra Org would introduce himself rather quickly, and Issei would do the same. Issei wondered why the Red Dragon Emperor would want to meet him of all people, and Syra Org would explain that he had heard about his fights, his fight with Riser Phoenix and with Kogabeel, as well as with Vali, the White Dragon Emperor. And he had to say, the power that Issei possessed was very interesting. Of course, he still felt as though he could get stronger, and he was going to be watching him to see just how much further he could improve. Issei would take this to heart. As he went to go rest, he would by chance go into the forest, where he would come across Koneko, who was lying under a tree, and she seemed really tired. Issei immediately rushed over to her and would keep her company until she eventually woke up, the two of them sitting next to a campfire under the night sky. As Koneko got up, Issei would hand her some food and she would thank him. Issei would ask Koneko what was wrong, and Koneko at first tried to keep it to herself, but Issei would persist. Koneko would feel a bit embarrassed for what she wanted to say. You see, she actually had a connection to the shield hero in a sense. Or at the very least, she knew of the shield hero, but Issei was the first one that she had ever seen, and it left her with mixed emotions. On one hand, he was a pervert, a degenerate in every which way, shape, and form. That got to Issei's pride a little bit, but he couldn't deny that that was true. But there was also something else. She would explain that her race of people, that being of animal spirits in and of themselves, humanoids with animalistic nature, you could say Nekos or anything else along those lines, they were often looked down upon and shunned as a species by some in other communities. But there was one thing that held them all together, and that was their stories of the shield hero. It wasn't lost on anyone that throughout history, the shield hero was someone who stood up for the weak and for the innocent. And for Koneko growing up, she heard the story of one hero in particular. It was the story of Naofumi, along with a beautiful raccoon girl spirit. Her name was Raftalia. It was a romantic story, a story of how Naofumi had saved her, and how he had taken care of her in her time of need, and how she too were able to grow in strength, and the two of them in their bond, it grew stronger and stronger over time. As a young child, she loved that story, and she always hoped that one day she would get to meet the shield hero. Of course, she had no idea that it would be Issei, but over time, she had come to see that Issei had good traits to him. He wasn't all bad. The more Issei learned about Koneko and her backstory, the more that he found himself being drawn to her. He learned about how her and her sister had been abandoned when they were younger. How after her sister committed an act of betrayal, it left a bad reputation on her as well, and she were left all alone. And how she was saved by Rias and given a home. He would then come to see that Koneko had been dealing with her own self-doubt. She had seen how everyone was growing in power all around her, and she felt stagnant. She didn't feel she was as important as she used to be. She thought that not too long from now she might be replaced with someone better. Someone worthy of truly being a rook for the House of Gremory, for her strength was lacking. She cursed herself for her weakness, for not accepting who she truly was, and Issei wondered what she meant by this. And that was when she would reveal her cat ears and cat tail. Issei was surprised, but not in a bad way. In fact, she looked very cute. But Koneko felt ashamed of this. It was her sage art power. A power that she really wasn't all that fond of. But she knew that she needed this power to get stronger. But at the same time, she didn't like to use sage arts like her sister did, because she felt as though if she used that power, she might be no better than her. Koneko's eyes would start to well up in tears, as she started to assume the worst about herself. However, Issei would wrap his jacket around her as he pulled her into a hug. He would tell her that He probably wasn't the shield hero that she had read about in her fairy tale books. He was far from heroic in every which way, and he knew that about himself. Truthfully, for all the good that he had done, Issei was always self-conscious around them. He knew that his perverted nature could sometimes annoy everyone, but he truly did love and care for all of his friends. That included her also. And if she ever felt like this power was too much for her, that she couldn't handle it all on her own, then she didn't have to. He wanted to be there for her, to support her, to stand with her no matter what. Because after all, they were not only comrades, but they were friends, all under the House of Gremory. And he would look after her, the way he would look after Rias, or Akeno, or Asia, or Zenobia, or anyone else for that matter. He didn't want her to doubt herself or her importance. Her strength was needed. He recalled when she trained him in combat training, and how he had taken what she had taught him, and how he continued to train and improve, even if not by much. The two of them stood up together, and Issei would throw a few punches and kicks, and Koneko was surprised to see that he actually had improved. He improved on what she taught him. Issei would then show her that he had only gotten as far as he had because he had everyone's help, everyone's support. And if she were willing, he wanted her to support him as well, because he valued her strength. This would make Koneko start to cry a little, but they were tears of joy. They were just the kind of words that she needed to hear. The two of them would then stand together under the light of the full moon, Koneko beginning to channel more of her sage arts, and Issei, he would slowly start to draw upon the power of the curse. As the two of their auras began to flare, Koneko's a bright, alluring blue, and Issei's a dark crimson. Their fists would collide, no words needing to be exchanged, as they merely talked through their actions. And for the remaining weeks of their training, the two of them would work together and improve. Eventually, their 3 weeks of training would come to an end, and Rias would be happy to be reunited with her household once more. Proud to see how all of them had improved and made major growth in their strength and training. She also saw that Koneko was especially close to Issei, in a very loving manner. Although when she learned more about how Koneko had finally started to overcome her own insecurities, and was now finally starting to grow into her own strength and accept herself, it truly made her happy. And for Rias, it was one of the many reasons why she had started to grow and love Issei so much. Maybe to someone like Issei, what he did might have been insignificant, but Issei embodied everything that the House of Gremory should be. To show that type of love and affection, to care about one another and to support one another through their trials. It was everything that she wanted in all the best ways. Being a pervert aside, Issei had the qualities of a true hero when it mattered the most, and that was something that everyone could take pride in. In the meanwhile, with Issei's training, while he had improved in some areas, most notably being able to improve in how he used and fought with his various shields, as well as other forms of magic and other abilities that he had been studying, he didn't unlock his balance breaker the way he wanted to. He could only tap into some of the cursed power itself. For Azazel, he would tell Issei that that was alright. The fact that his training had shown any sort of improvement was definitely an upside, and that they just had to keep focusing on the positive. The last thing they wanted was for him to draw on too much of that cursed power and potentially hurt himself in the process. It was better to make slow and steady than to be rushing ahead and have something even worse happen later on. In the meantime, he would tell everyone to get ready for the nightly dinner that was going to be taking place, as the other factions were all going to be gathered together to go over the peace treaty, as well as to deal with the Chaos Brigade in the future. And among those who were coming, it was said that Odin from Asgard was going to be in attendance as well, and that Rias and her team were going to be working as security to make sure that everything was on the up and up and everything stayed secure. The party was a very lively event, and some had even taken to dressing for the occasion. Issei getting a chance to actually see the other deities and the other pantheon of gods all around him. He also would eventually run into Ravel Phoenix of all people, Riser Phoenix's younger sister, who explained that she was only with her brother because he needed to fill out a roster at the last minute, but she was actually a bishop belonging to her mother. But since her mother didn't participate in raiding games, she was actually a free-roaming bishop and could pretty much go and do as she pleased. She would apologize to Issei though for how she and her brother behaved, realizing that pride truly did come before the fall, and they shouldn't have been so arrogant. She would also hand him a black box, containing something that she claimed was very important, and Issei would make sure to put it inside of his coat pocket. As he did so, Ravel would also invite him for tea and cookies sometimes. She really did like to bake and brew her own specially made teas, and she hoped he would try it, and he agreed happily. As the other members of the House of Gremory walked through the halls making sure that everything was in order, there would be a brief fight and scuffle that would take place. As they went to go and check on things, that's when Issei would see Cyber-Org once more, breaking up the dispute rather quickly, before effortlessly slamming the one causing trouble into the side of the wall. Rias wondering why her cousin had to go so far, but Cyber-Org would apologize, stating that sometimes he didn't know his own strength. This is what really caught Issei's attention. Rias was surprised that he had met Cyber-Org before, but what surprised Issei was that they were cousins. Rias would then explain that her family and his family were connected through marriage on her aunt's side, that while she were a part of the House of Gremory, he was a part of the House of Baal. And, in case he didn't know, he was the Red Dragon Emperor, which gave him a lot of clout in the underworld. Issei coming face to face with Cyber-Org once more. There was a certain tension that could be felt brewing, rising between the two of them. It wasn't anything on a major scale, but still, there was an urge. Almost as if Issei were being drawn, even if he didn't want to be. He felt as though they were going to have to fight at some point. And he kind of was looking forward to it. In the meanwhile, Koneko would sense something from the outside. She would look to Issei and tug on his arm, telling him what she felt and that she needed to go at once. Issei could see the seriousness in her eyes, and he quickly followed behind her, along with Rias, who was also worried as well for her servants. The three of them making their way through the forest as they would follow Koneko, whose senses were now at an all-time high. It didn't take her long to get to one tree in particular, and sitting atop it was an older woman, dressed in a black kimono, with long, dark hair, with cat-like ears of her own. Koneko would address her as Kuroka, and Kuroka addressing Koneko as her sister. Issei now getting a chance to see the famed sister that both Rias and Koneko had spoken so much about. The two Nekomata sisters, both revered for their sage art abilities. In the meantime, as the party was getting underway. Odin, the representative and the god of Valhalla and Asgard itself, would make his arrival, along with his trusted attendant Rostvisa, the warrior Valkyrie, who also had other issues, mainly pertaining to that she was what you would call a woman at the ripe old age, where it was time to settle down and get a man, and that was one department she lacked in. And it didn't do any better when Odin teased her about this. She would usually end up breaking down and crying in the corner, knowing that it wasn't her fault that she couldn't get a man, it was just the circumstances she had been in. And it didn't help her confidence at all that her boss of all people seemed to always leisure her after the younger type. She was just as good, in her mind. But other than that, everything seemed to be going well, and the treaty was prepared to be signed, when just as Azazel had predicted, an attack would take place. From out of a magical summoning circle would appear none other than the Norse god of mischief himself, Loki. Already, it wasn't too hard to tell that he had already joined the side of the Chaos Brigade, and that his reason for doing so were rather quite simple. He felt as though a peace treaty would stop the very motion of Ragnarok, his coming war in the apocalypse. And that was something he couldn't stand for. He, nor his summonings. As a band of powerful monstrous wolves would all appear from around inside of the hall, and everyone would take their position as the attack on the summit would take place, while the others would have to deal with Loki. Issei and the others would be able to sense what was going on from a distance. However, they would be unable to get back, as a barrier would be formed all around them, keeping them trapped there in the meantime. Everyone would stay and prepare for battle, as Kuroka would go face to face with her sister in Rias, while Issei would summon his shield to go one-on-one against Biko, the descendant of Son Goku, the fighting Buddha god. When it came in terms of battle, Biko was more light and nimble of a fighter that Issei had ever come across. Flying on his cloud Nimbus, he was able to keep his distance along with his extending staff, able to fight long range. Issei knew that he needed to close the gap, but how he could do so, that was a bit tricky. Until one thought came to mind. He would summon multiple airstrike shields at various places in the sky, causing Biko to have to duck and dodge at various points to avoid being hit, all the while being manipulated and moved to an area where Issei could deliver a finishing strike, landing a few good blows in on his own, before eventually Tani would arrive and take over things, agreeing that he could fight the fighting Buddha, while Issei would go and check on Koneko and Rias. As he did so, he would go and find that the two girls were holding their own against Kuroka as best they could. Kuroka was using some of her special sage arts, a type of demonic energy that could create a special poison akin to devils, although Issei was immune thanks to the dragon within him. Kuroka would continue to make her threats very clear, that if Koneko didn't come with her, she would take her by force and do whatever she believed was necessary. Koneko would be a bit fearful at that moment, but she had her resolve. She wanted to stay where she were loved and where she loved the people that she cared for. She valued everyone and she didn't want to leave them. Kuroka would only laugh at this, scoffing that she had sentiments for the shield, someone who was nothing more but their childhood hero. And besides, this boy here was no real shield hero. He wasn't anything special or significant, and there was no reason to put her faith in him. The more that Kuroka continued to berate Koneko, she could feel her heart beginning to waver. However, for Issei, his rage was only starting to boil. He could feel the mark of the dragon starting to grow all around him, and both Koneko and Rias would look on horrified, as dark markings would appear all around Issei's body, his shield starting to burn bright hot with fire as he looked back towards Kuroka. If there was one thing that triggered Issei more than anything, it was the thought of losing those closest to him. Anyone who threatened to take away what he felt was rightfully his, well, that was just crossing the line. And for Issei, he had finally reached that junction. He had reached that point. And Kuroi would warn him that now was the time. Now was the time to decide what road he would go down. He could feel himself being pulled in both directions. He could feel the darkness. It was tempting, exhilarating. It was the fast way, the easy way. Give in to his emotions, give in to the hatred, the anger. Let his wrath burn furiously, and he could destroy everything here and now. It was almost as if the darkness was calling to him. But then he would hear another voice, a voice in the light. It was Koneko. She yelled for Issei not to give in. She believed in him, that of all of the shield heroes that had come before, he would be the greatest of them all. He would be the hero that would break the curse of hatred, the curse of wrath. He would rise above and be the greatest shield hero that had ever lived, because she truly believed in him. He was her hero. With Rias echoing those same sentiments, Issei could feel the love and the warmth surround him as he was pulled from the darkness and into the light. He would don the armor of the Black Dragon, completely shrouded. However, now his aura was a lot more brighter and clearer than before. He had rage, and he had the fury, but it was how he chose to use and direct that power. You see, the power of the shield, to truly unlock its balance breaker, it didn't come from a want, it came from a need, a desire. The shield was truly at its most strongest when it was used for what it was intended to. The shield did not start wars. The shield did not seek conflict, but it brought the conflict to an end. The shield was the protector, something that would stand to defend against all those who looked to do harm. That was the purpose of the shield. The shield was not a weapon of war. It was the ultimate weapon of protection. What could be greater a form of love than the love that defends and fights for what is true? With that, Issei would scream onto the heavens themselves, fully donning the black armor of the Black Dragon, with his shield close in tow. He would quick change the shield using various abilities and properties to fight and counter against Kuroka, pushing her back a great deal, much stronger than he had originally. Even when Biko tried to get involved, he too was sent back with the awesome power of the Black Dragon, as Issei made his position very clear, that Koneko was staying, and anyone who tried to hurt or take away those that were precious to him, then they would have to answer to the Black Dragon. As his aura would continue to emanate all around them, both Rias and Koneko, absolutely amazed at what they were seeing from Issei, seeing him push past his limits and reach this new level of power. Koneko could feel in her heart that Issei was truly going to be the shield hero that she had read in those stories, that he would be a hero that the world would be proud of. And Rias echoed those same sentiments within her own heart. In the end, their battle would force Kuroka and Biko to retreat, seeing as how they had lost the advantage, and Loki had been dealt with in the meantime. Issei, Rias, and Koneko would then make their way back to the mansion with the others and be filled in on what happened. While Loki's guard was down, one of the other Devil Kings, Beelzebub, would be able to use his sealing magic to temporarily move him to an isolated location in the Gremory domain. He would be sealed for a short while, but he would be released soon. But until then, the only thing they could do now was rest and prepare as best they could. And Odin was going to be making provisions so that help could be provided also, in his own way. As everyone took time to relax and recover from everything they had been through, Issei would be walking through the halls that night when he came across Rias as the two of them were on their way to the baths respectively. As they made their way through, Issei would thank Rias. He would thank her for always looking out for them and watching over them. Although Rias, she was thankful herself. Thankful to have such a loving household fight beside her. She truly felt unworthy. But Issei would tell her the contrary. In a lot of ways, they felt as though they were unworthy to stand by her. But they hoped that they would be worthy of the title of Gremory someday. Rias would assure them that no matter what, they were more than worthy, for they had proven it time and time again. As the night would go on, the other leaders of their respective factions, Sir Zex, Azazel, Michael, now all gathered together. They knew that they had to deal with Loki as well as the Chaos Brigade, and they knew that their fight was far from over. They now knew that they were at a critical point in terms of the battle, and everything that was soon to come at hand. But now, when the fight came, they were going to need to rely on more than just their strength, but the strength of those that followed them, and the ones that they had to train and lead into the future. They had many bright and young up-and-coming fighters, all of whom were capable of holding their own. It seemed as though in the near future, their strength was going to be what would be relied upon, and they would be the ones who would pave the way into the future. If their peace was to prevail, if they were truly going to create a world free of war and chaos, then it was time for them to look towards the future. A time where devils, angels, and fallen angels, and all those in between who were once divided, would now be able to join together and fight as one. And their first test would be none other than the god of mischief himself, Loki of the Jotunheim. This concludes What If Issei Was the Shield Hero? High School DxD Curse of the Shield, Season 3, Part 1. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that is to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we are going to be continuing What If Naruto Was Trained by Dr. Strange, Naruto Mystic Adventures, Part 7. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I am Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.